which of these bias binding tools works the best and which one am I going to toss in the bin? We're going to find out as I teach you how to make bias binding. But first, some bloopers. Thing to have in your toolkit, sewing kit, dang it. Oh no, mayday. Which is boing, boing. Perfect, it's gonna be in this. Yeah, that'll do. Hi crafty people! Today I'm teaching you how to make bias binding. There are a lot of different projects that call for bias binding, whether it be on the inside of a garment to make the edges nice and neat, or you might be using it in a decorative way like I'm doing. I'm using the bias binding I make today to put on some art smocks to decorate the edges and also to finish them off in a nice way as well, and on the neck. This is an art smock I made with some blue bias binding that I have made. And today I'll be making some yellow bias binding tape so that I can put it on a different art smock that I'm making, which I'll actually be sharing in next week's video. If this happens to be your first time on my channel, then welcome. My name's Marie and this channel is all about motivating mums to make and mend. So if you're interested in learning how to make bias binding or make various other projects for children, this channel is just right for you. I'd love for you to subscribe so you can come back to watch some of my future videos, including when I make the art smock next week. So with all of our introductions out of the way, let's get making.
My mum makes bias tape.
As I mentioned, this yellow bias binding is destined to be the border on an art smock, and this is the fabric that I have picked for the art smock to be made from. It is a really fun looking PUL fabric from Noosa Fabric. I can link this fabric down below if you would like to buy some for yourself. I think it's perfect for an art smock because it already looks like it has paint on it, and I think that the yellow bias binding that we're making today will really complement it well. Let's start making our bias binding by first collecting all the tools we're going to need. I'm going to be using a rotary blade and a rotary mat along with my ruler that goes with it. This acrylic ruler has all the measurements written on it, so I'm using that to measure as well. But if you don't have a rotary blade and mat, you can simply just use scissors and a tape measure, that's fine too. You'll also need an iron and an ironing board or mat, and I would recommend you getting a tape maker. I'll show you a little bit later the one that I like using the best. So now that we've gathered all of our tools, let's work out what bias means and how we then go about cutting our bias strips. When fabric is made, they use threads going horizontally and vertically, and they weave them together to create our fabric. And to cut our fabric on the bias, we're going to cut it diagonally against that weave. So we're going to be cutting at a 45-degree angle on our fabric. So to start cutting our bias strips, we're going to cut one long line along the bias of our fabric. To do that, I'm using my rotary mat, which actually has the angles already printed on it, and I'm lining the edge of my fabric up with the 45-degree line. From there, I'm able to use my rotary blade to just cut a straight line, which will give me a 45-degree angle that I'm going to work from to then cut the rest of my strips. At this point, I realized that my blade wasn't particularly sharp, so it wasn't cutting properly, so I do recommend you change your blades quite regularly, and that way your lines will be nice and sharp and you won't be dealing with the blade not cutting certain sections properly. So once I've cut that 45-degree angle on my fabric, I'm then going to cut all my bias strips from here so that I know that they are all diagonal to the weave of the grain of my fabric. I'm wanting my bias strips to be 25 millimeters wide, which is about an inch. So I'm cutting my fabric strips to be twice that width, so 5 centimeters or 2 inches. So whatever width you want your final tape to be, you'll need to double that width to cut your strips. I use the lines on my ruler to know how big to cut each of my strips. So this ruler has been really helpful because the measurements are already there on top of it. You can just line the ruler up on top of the fabric that you're cutting so that it is cutting the correct width, and just cut along the fabric because it's hard to see the measurements on the mat underneath. So having the measurements on top of your fabric is very handy. If you're not using a rotary blade and a mat, you can just use scissors, but I would recommend that you draw your lines in first before you cut them. I'm going to need 3 meters of bias tape for each of the 2 art smocks that I'm making, so 6 meters of bias tape in total. And obviously each of these strips I'm making is not 6 meters, but I'll be showing you how we can join these strips together to make one really long piece of bias tape. When joining our strips together, we're going to join them together still with that diagonal angle on the edge. We're not going to cut them at a 90-degree angle because then when we do fold up our bias strips, all of our stitching is going to be on top of each other, which will create a bulky part in our bias tape. So instead, we're going to keep that diagonal angle and join our strips together, which will help our bias tape to look a bit more smooth and for the join to be less noticeable. So in order to join our strips together while keeping that diagonal angle, we're going to line them up so that they create a right angle together, and then we're going to fold one of the triangles over the other one. I've also overlapped the triangle a little bit just to make sure that it allows for the seam allowance that I'm cutting. So as I've overlapped my triangle, I've moved it 1 centimeter in from the side and 1 centimeter down from the bottom, so that there's just that little tiny 1 centimeter triangle at the bottom, which will allow for our seam allowance. Then I'm going to sew our 2 strips together along this diagonal with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And the aim is to be starting to sew where the 2 fabrics cross over and finishing sewing where the 2 fabrics cross over at the bottom as well. So we're going to pin our strips together and sew them together just using a simple straight stitch on our sewing machine. If you're joining multiple strips together, you'll need to make sure that each subsequent strip is joined on the same side as the previous ones. So just check which direction your seams are going to make sure that your joins are all on the same side of your strip. So in order to turn our 50mm strip that we have here into our 25mm tape, we're going to need our tape maker and our iron. So here are 2 examples of what the tape makers look like that I have used. This one here is one from Birch, which is an Australian company that make lots of different sewing essentials, and usually I like their products, but unfortunately their tape maker here is no good, not worth its money. I bought this one from Spotlight, which is our craft store here in Australia, and it wasn't worth the money I paid for it. This one here I bought from eBay. Did we buy these from eBay or Amazon? eBay. We bought it from eBay. This one here we bought from eBay, and it came in a set of 4 different sizes, and it only cost me $10, and it has been excellent. I'll show you a bit of a demonstration of how I use each of these so that you can see both how to use it and what I mean by this one being the one that you want to buy. So in order to use our tape maker, we're going to put the fabric strip through the wide end of our bias tape maker, and it will curve it up around the sides just like this. And as you pull it through the tape maker, it will fold it for you so that the 2 sides are meeting in the middle. As you drag your tape maker along the strips of fabric, you then need to follow it immediately with the iron to press those folds in place so that they don't come unfolded. If you're finding that your fabric is coming unfolded as you're making your bias tape, you might like to dampen your strips just by giving a little squirt with a squirt bottle, and the steam that will create will help you to have really crisp edges as you're ironing. We're going to continue pulling our bias tape maker down our strip of fabric and following it with the iron so we can press those folds in place. It works fine to go over the seams we've made when we joined our strips together. You just need to remember to iron open the seam first and then keep pulling your bias tape maker over that section and ironing it flat as you would the other parts. As you can see, having a tape maker like this is a really easy way to make bias tape because you're not having to manually fold your fabric in half and then iron it there and then fold the 2 edges into the middle and iron it flat again. It is a lot easier to just use this tool to do it all straight at once. I'm going to show you how our one from Birch compares just so you can see what I mean about that one not working so well. So the same thing as before, we're poking our fabric through the wide end, but as you can probably tell, the front of this one is not tight enough to keep the folds in place as you're ironing. So even if you follow it directly with the iron, as we did with our first bias tape maker, the folds just come straight out. They're not pushing down firmly enough, and it's just really not working. So here is the direct comparison of the 2, and unfortunately it's just the way it is. It's just not very well designed, and so I really can't recommend the one from Birch, but I would recommend the one that I bought from eBay. So I will be linking the tape maker that I've used here from eBay in the description box if you'd like to get some for yourself. Now, I didn't make this video to be mean to Birch. I think they're a great company that do make other really good sewing tools, this unfortunately not being one of them, but I did reach out to Birch before I made this video just to see if I was doing something wrong or if it was a faulty product, and unfortunately that's not the case. It's just the way they are poorly designed. They offered to send me another one, but it would have been exactly the same as the one I have. It's not that the one I have is faulty, it's just the way they are, unfortunately. So the reason I'm sharing this with you isn't to be mean to their company, but it's just to be really helpful to you so that you know that you're buying the best product in order to make this work for you. At this point, your bias tape is all now ready for you to use for your project. I personally need to have my bias tape folded over on itself in order for me to use it to put a border around the art smocks. So I'm going to fold my bias tape over on itself and iron it flat again so that it is ready for me to use. One little tip about storing your bias tape once you have made it, I like to roll mine up on itself and then clip it together so that it's not going to come unraveled and sort of lose the folds that you've spent so much time putting into them. So there you have it. We have successfully made our bias binding. I'd love to know in a comment below what you're using your bias binding for, and if you would like to come back and see me use my bias binding on the art smock, then don't forget to subscribe so that you can come back next week and watch me make that video. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like down below, and I'd love for you to also come and follow me over on Instagram so you can see what I'm up to during the week. On Instagram, we also use the hashtag #ShowMySew and also on Facebook so that you can share some of your projects with me. I have here with me today a project from Nikisha, who shared with me on Facebook that she has made a change table cover, and it's got a really cute grey background with some little sheep on it. Very cute, and she has said that she has made it for her first baby. So congratulations on being pregnant with your first baby. That's very exciting, and thank you for sharing with me your project that you made. Nikisha made this using a tutorial I made a few videos ago about how to make a change table cover, so if you're interested in making one too, I can link that video in the description box for you. So thank you, Nikisha, for sharing with me your project, and if you would like your project featured on my channel, then you can share it with me by using the hashtag #ShowMySew on Instagram or Facebook, and each week I'll be picking a project from our community here to share with you. So thanks again for watching this video. I hope that it was helpful and informative, and until next time, go get creative, and I'll see you later.